The first thing you noticed about Harlan County in late October was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of a place at rest, but the particular quiet of a place that had learned to hold its breath the way an old dog lies still when it knows the boot is coming. The trees along US 25 had gone the color of rusted iron, and the highway cut through them like a scar that refused to heal. Rex Donovan had ridden this road before years ago, passing through without stopping the way men like him pass through most places. He had not expected to stop this time either. He pulled the throttle back as the town limit sign appeared. Harlan, Kentucky, population 1,645. And underneath someone had scratched in marker the words, God willing. Four bikes followed him in the Forge Saints MC, rolling two by two the way they always rode when they entered somewhere new. Slow enough to look deliberate. Fast enough to look like they were not afraid of whatever waited inside. Rex was 54 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples 8 years ago, and he had stopped fighting it the same month. The beard was trimmed close, the kind of trim that is said he thought about it, but not too much. The vest was old, the leather softened to something that moved with him like a second skin. Forge Saints MC, stitched across the back in thread the color of old blood, Detroit chapter beneath it. He had worn variations of that vest for 23 years. Some men put on a uniform and become somebody else. Rex had put on the vest and become more of who he already was. He parked in front of a diner that sat on the corner of Main Street and a road too small to have a name on the sign. The diner itself was the kind of building that had been added to slowly over decades. A wall of windows along the front, a hand-painted sign above the door that read Dixie's Counter, and underneath that smaller but still confident established 1991. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with 3 cars in it, 2 of them older than 10 years. The kind of place that survives on loyalty because there is nothing else to survive on. His 4 riders came in behind him. Tucker Roth parking last, always last, the habit of a man who liked to know where the exits were. Tucker was 46, lean with reading glasses he wore on a cord around his neck, and hands that had once typed court documents and now mostly repaired engines. He had been a clerk at the Wayne County Circuit Court for 7 years before he found the Forge Saints, and he brought to the club the particular usefulness of a man who understood how paperwork could be used as a weapon. They took the corner booth, the one with sight lines to both the door and the counter. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with the kind of efficiency that came from years of not being tipped enough, brought coffee without being asked. Rex wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out the window at the street. That was when he saw the logo on the paper coaster under his coffee. A simple black circle inside it, a farmhouse and a fence, and the words Riggs Family Farm Established, 1958, printed in plain block letters. Rex set his mug down. He picked up the coaster and turned it over. On the back, smaller in address, just outside town Riggs Road off Route 38. He sat with that for a moment. The way you sit with something when you are not sure if it is coincidence or the universe doing what it sometimes does, which is point at a wound you forgot you had. The name Riggs had not come up in 19 years. He had not looked for it. He was not the kind of man who looked for things like that, but he had not forgotten it either. Some debts you carry the way you carry a scar, not painful anymore, just present. A reminder that something once cut you deep enough to leave a mark you could not have removed even if you had wanted to. Wade Riggs had been a man Rex met once, just once, on a night in Detroit that should have ended very differently. Rex had been 35, drunk in a bar where the wrong kind of argument had turned into the wrong kind of situation, and Rex had been in the middle of it the way he was in the middle of most situations back then, which was with both fists and no plan for after. The men he was fighting were not the kind who stopped when you went down. Rex had understood that about 8 seconds too late. Wade Riggs had been in the wrong bar on the wrong night. He was passing through Detroit on a trucking run, had stopped for one beer, and found himself standing next to a man about to take a very bad beating from 3 other men. Wade was not young. He was not built for fighting. What he did have was a voice that carried in a face that people believed without understanding why. And he used both of them to stop what was happening before it became something that could not be stopped. He drove Rex to Detroit Medical Center himself, sat in the plastic chairs in the emergency room at 2 in the morning in a city that was not his, waited until the doctor came out. He did not have to do any of that. Rex had told him so. Wade had looked at him with brown eyes that were tired but not unkind. "I have a wife back home," he had said. "She runs a diner. She would never forgive me if I walked past a man who needed stopping for." He had shrugged the way simple men shrug at things that are not simple at all. "She raised me right. Even at my age, I still try to do what she would want." Wade Riggs had given Rex a number to call if he ever needed anything. Rex had not called it. 2 years later, he heard from someone who knew someone that Wade Riggs had died in a trucking accident on I-65 outside of Bowling Green. Rex had sat alone in his garage for 2 hours that night, not doing anything, just sitting. Then he had gone to work. The Forge Saints MC was not named after a philosophy. It was named after a specific night in a specific emergency room and the specific feeling of owing something to a man who was already gone. The forging was what happened in the fire of that night. The sainthood was what you tried to become in the years after. Rex was still looking at the coaster when the door opened. She came in fast, the way people come in when they are trying not to be seen coming in, keeping close to the door and scanning the room before letting it shut behind her. She was young, mid-20s, with dark circles under her eyes and hair that had been tied back at some point and had mostly come loose since. Her jacket was thin for October, the kind of thin that said she had not replaced it because she could not, and she was carrying a child on her hip. A little girl 4 years old at most, with tangled dark hair and pale cheeks and the particular stillness of a small child who had learned not to make noise when her mother was scared. Rex watched her the way he watched everything in a room without making it obvious that he was watching. She was not looking for a table. Her eyes went to the faces one by one the way a person's eyes go when they are looking for a particular kind of face, the kind that might say yes instead of no. She stopped when she got to Rex, not because he looked approachable. He did not look approachable. He looked like what he was, a large man in a leather vest with a scar on his jaw and 30 years of hard decisions written in his posture. She stopped because she had run out of room. There was nowhere else to go. He saw her read the vest. Forge Saints MC. He saw the recognition in her face, not of the specific club, but of the category and the fear that came with it. She took a half step backward toward the door. "We do not bite," Tucker said from across the table without looking up from his coffee. The woman held her ground. Barely. The child pressed her face against her mother's shoulder. The woman's jaw worked like she was chewing on what she needed to say and was not sure she could get it out. Rex set down the coaster. "What do you need?" The directness of it seemed to steady her. She had been bracing for something worse. "I need help." Her voice was controlled, but only just. "I need $280 before 5 o'clock today, or they take my grandmother's property. I do not have it. I have been to every person I know in this county, and I do not have it." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I am not asking for charity. I will pay it back. I have a job starting next month in Corbin. I just need to get through today." Rex looked at her. "What property?" She hesitated. "My grandmother's farm, the Riggs place out on Route 38. The table went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the diner. Rex kept his voice even. "What is your grandmother's name?" "Dixie. Dixie Riggs." She frowned at whatever was on his face. "Do you know her?" Rex put both palms flat on the table and breathed out slowly. "What is your name?" "Bonnie. Bonnie Slater." She shifted the child on her hip. "This is Winnie." Rex looked at the little girl. Winnie looked back at him with dark eyes that were fully present and fully unafraid, the peculiar courage of a child who has not yet learned that large men in leather vests are supposed to be frightening. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out his wallet. He set it on the table, pulled out $300 bills, and held them out toward Bonnie. She did not take them immediately. Her face did something complicated. "I told you I will pay it back." "I know you will," Rex said. "Take the money, Bonnie." She took it. Her hand was shaking, and she was angry at it for shaking. He could see that. She pressed the bills against her palm and looked at him with an expression that was not quite gratitude, because gratitude alone was not complicated enough to describe what it was. "Why?" The door to the kitchen opened. A woman came through it carrying a pot of coffee, moving with the easy authority of someone who had poured coffee in this room for 30 years and owned every inch of the act. She was 69 maybe, with short white hair, cut close, and practical reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She was wearing a plain green apron over a white blouse, and she had the hands of a woman who had used them her whole life, thick at the knuckles, honest. She was halfway to the counter when she saw the group in the corner booth. She paused. Not because of the vests. Her eyes went past the vests and past Tucker and past the other three and landed on Rex and stayed there. He felt it, looked up, looked at her. She was staring at his left wrist. At the ring, a plain iron band, hand-hammered, worn smooth from years of contact with skin. Rex had worn it since the night it was given to him. He had never taken it off. Dixie Riggs set the coffee pot down on the nearest table without looking at it. Her hand found the edge of the counter. Where did you get that ring? The diner had gone quiet without anyone deciding to make it quiet. Rex stood up from the booth, all the way his full height, which was considerable. He turned to face her. He could see Wade in her face the way you see a landscape in a reflection, not exact but unmistakable, the same set to the jaw, the same patient quality in the eyes. A man gave it to me, Rex said, in Detroit, 19 years ago. His name was Wade Riggs. Dixie put her hand over her mouth. Just for a moment, and then she took it away. She was a woman who had learned to hold herself together in front of people. But her eyes were bright and her throat moved as she swallowed. He took that off his own hand the night before he died, she said. Her voice was steady, but only through an act of will that Rex recognized because he had practiced the same act himself. He told me he gave it to a man in Detroit who looked like he needed something solid. I always wondered who had it. Bonnie was looking back and forth between Rex and her grandmother. The child in her arms had turned to look at the white-haired woman reaching toward her with one small hand. Grandma Winnie said. The room's silence made the word enormous. Dixie came around the counter and took Winnie from Bonnie's arms in the automatic way of grandmothers who have been doing it long enough that it does not require thought. She held the child against her chest and looked at Rex over the girl's dark hair. He hammered that ring himself, Dixie said, from a piece of iron pipe he found in the shop. He said iron was honest. It did not pretend to be gold. She paused. He only ever made two, kept one himself. He said he gave the other to a man who needed something honest to hold on to. Rex looked at the ring on his finger. 19 years of road of rain, of engine grease and bar fights and funerals and celebrations, and through all of it, this piece of hammered iron on his hand that belonged to a man he knew for 6 hours. He saved my life, Rex said. Not in a dramatic way, in the way that matters more than dramatic. He stopped and I did not die, and then I had to figure out what to do with the not dying. Mavis nodded. That sounds like him. She caught herself. Dixie, sorry, that is a long habit. Rex looked at her. That was my mother's name too. Dixie looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman recalibrating something. Then she said simply, come sit at the counter, let me pour you a real cup. Rex sat. He told her what he needed to understand. She told him. Dixie Riggs had spent 31 years as a records clerk for Harlan County before she retired in 2017. She knew what a legitimate document looked like. She knew how the county's filing system worked, what papers were generated when land changed hands, what the sequence of a proper property transfer occur looked like in the public record. She had organized those records herself for 3 decades. When Gregory Monroe appeared at her door in May, with a binder full of papers claiming that Wade had sold 9 acres of the eastern bottomland to Monroe Development Partners in 2001, the year before he died, she had known something was wrong before she finished reading the first page. Wade did not sell property, she said. He bought it when he could kept what he had and intended to pass it on. That was his belief about land. You held it in trust for the people who came after. She set the binder on the counter between them. The transfer tax filing is missing from the county record. I know because I filed those records for 30 years. I know exactly what a 2001 transfer in this county should look like and where it should sit in the system. This sale does not exist in the records because it never happened. Tucker had moved to the counter. He was looking at the document with the particular expression he wore when he was not seeing the paper itself but the system behind it. What is the notary name? Dixie indicated a line. Jace O'Connor. He worked at Monroe's office. Past tense, he left in August. Nobody knows where he went. Tucker looked at Rex. Rex looked back at him. The understanding that passed between them did not require words. The bell above the door made its sound. The door opened. The man who came through it was not physically large. He was perhaps 50 in a blue suit that had been cut for his body by someone who understood bodies, and he carried himself with the ease of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a long time. His hair was dark and neat, and the gray at his temples was exactly the right amount, the kind of gray that said experienced and not old. He had 2 men behind him who were physically large and wore it the way men do when they are being paid to wear it. Mrs. Riggs? His voice was warm in the specific way of men who use warmth the way other men use money. I did not realize you had company today. He looked at the booth where the other 4 Forge Saints members sat. He looked at Tucker. He looked at Rex. Something shifted in his expression, very small and very fast, but Rex caught it because Rex had spent 23 years watching for that specific flicker. It was the expression of a man recalculating. Gregory Monroe, Dixie said. Her voice did not waver. Indeed, he smiled. I simply wanted to stop in and remind you that today is Tuesday, and the transfer of possession is scheduled for Friday per Judge Pierce's order. I hope you have had time to make arrangements. He looked at the binder on the counter, then at Rex. Are these your friends? We were just having coffee, Rex said. Monroe studied him for a moment, the kind of study that's actually assessment. Forge Saints MC Detroit. He read the back of the vest. I was not aware Mrs. Riggs had connections in Detroit. People have connections in all sorts of places, Rex said. It tends to happen over a lifetime. Monroe's smile remained exactly where it was, neither widening nor fading, which was somehow worse than if it had moved. Enjoy your coffee. He looked at Dixie, Friday Mrs. Riggs. He turned and left. The 2 large men followed. The bell above the door sounded again, and then the silence came back different now, with a shape to it. Dixie did not watch him go. She was watching Rex. He has the judge, she said quietly. He has the sheriff. He has half the county commission in one pocket or another. My lawyer quit 3 weeks ago and no one in Harlan will take the case. I called 2 firms in Lexington. They both found reasons to decline. Who is the sheriff, Rex asked. Daniel Ford. He has been sheriff for 12 years. Rex looked at Tucker. You see any cameras out front? Tucker had already turned toward the window. One on the bank across the street, angled toward the intersection. He paused. Monroe's office is on the other side of that intersection. Rex nodded once. He took his phone from his pocket and moved to the window without hurrying. He stood at the angle that let him see through the glass to the building across the intersection, where Gregory Monroe was now standing on the sidewalk, not going inside, talking on the phone, and where Daniel Ford's county sheriff cruiser had just pulled to the curb with the particular timing of a car that was expected. Rex watched Ford step out, watched Monroe end his phone call, watched the 2 men stand together on the sidewalk in the way of men who know each other well enough to skip the pleasantries. Watched Monroe produce an envelope from inside his jacket and hand it to Ford with the casualness of men who have done this so many times that caution has been replaced by routine. Rex raised his phone and took a series of photographs, not hurrying, taking his time. Does this town have a motel, he said. 3 miles north, Bonnie said. The Harlan Rest. Then we will be there tonight. He turned from the window. He looked at Dixie. Do not go anywhere alone. Do not answer the door after dark. Keep these documents somewhere that is not this building. He paused. I need to make a phone call. He walked out the front door, stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, the tree line above the town in its colors, and dialed a number he had not dialed in the way that counted. The way where you were asking for everything. The phone rang twice. Zane Bishop answered. He was the oldest founding member, a man who had been with Rex since the first year and who understood the weight in Rex's voice before Rex even said the words. Get me everybody, Rex said. All 53. Harlan, Kentucky. Drive through the night if you have to. He looked down at the ring on his finger, at the hammered iron that had ridden 23 years and 1,000 miles and had ended up exactly where it was always supposed to end up. Tell them we found Wade Riggs's wife. Tell them the Forge is lit. That was the call sign. Forge is lit. The Forge Saints MC did not use it often. It meant everything, all of it. Every person, every resource, every favor owed in every city from here to the coast. It meant the thing that needed doing was the kind of thing the club had been built for. He hung up, stood for a moment in the cold air. Across the intersection, Ford's cruiser sat at the curb. Inside Monroe's office, a light was on behind frosted glass. In the diner behind Rex, a 69-year-old woman was holding a binder of forged documents, and a 4-year-old girl was sitting on a counter with the calm of a child who had decided the world was interesting. Wade Riggs had driven trucks across this country for 20 years. He had come home to this land and this woman and this diner. He had stopped one night in Detroit for a stranger who should not have survived. He had gone home the next morning and died 2 years later on a highway and left behind a ring that had traveled 19 years to get back to where it started. Some debts did not have a dollar amount. Some debts had a weight that you carried until the day came when you could set them down in the right place. Rex went back inside. Dixie was at the window. She had watched him make the call. She had seen the way he stood while he made it. How many, she said. 53, Rex said. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had been sitting in a hospital waiting room on the last night her husband was still alive. He would have liked you, she said. Wade, he would have liked you very much. I did not know him well enough, Rex said. He knew you well enough to give you the ring, she said. He picked up that pipe and hammered it himself in the cold of the shop that night in November. He did not do things like that casually. She picked up Winnie from the counter and held the child against her hip, with the ease of a woman who had held children all her life. Stay for dinner, all of you. I will not have men sleeping at the Harlan Rest without a proper meal first. She turned back toward the kitchen. Tucker, who had been quiet through all of it, taking it in with the patience of a man trained to notice what the record said, picked up the binder and began to read. The meal Dixie made was not elaborate. It was the kind of meal a woman makes when she has been feeding people for 40 years and no longer thinks about it, a skill that has passed below the level of intention and become reflex. There was cornbread, and there was a pot of soup beans with ham that had been on the stove since morning, and there was coffee kept hot by the kind of automatic attention that does not require remembering. The 5 Forge Saints men sat around the largest table near the window and ate without performing the eating, which was the highest compliment you could pay food. Winnie ate in the high chair that Dixie produced from a back room, a thing worn from use and repainted once at some point in yellow eating, with the focused purpose of small children everywhere. Bonnie sat beside her daughter and ate in the distracted way of a woman whose mind was working on something else, glancing at the door, occasionally glancing at Rex. Rex ate without hurrying. He was watching the room the way he always watched rooms, not nervously, but thoroughly, the habit of a man who had spent 2 decades in situations where the difference between what you noticed and what you missed could be measured in permanent ways. He was also watching Dixie, who moved between the kitchen and the tables with the efficiency of a woman who had run this place alone for long enough that her body knew the choreography without her having to think about it. She had not mentioned the farm again since sitting them down. She had focused on the meal. But Rex could see the weight of it in how she carried herself, a particular set to the shoulders that was not posture but something more internal, the physical expression of a person who has been holding too much for too long. After dinner, Dixie brought out the binder again. She spread the documents across the table where the soup bowls had been, and Tucker put on his reading glasses and began to go through them in the methodical way he had learned in the courthouse, starting from the last page and working forward because the last page was always where the errors lived. Tell me about your husband selling property, Tucker said, not looking up from the page. Was it something he ever talked about? Any property, any sale in the early 2000s? Dixie sat across from him. Wade did not sell property. He bought it when he could kept what he had and passed it on. That was his philosophy. The Riggs farm has been in the family since his grandfather cleared that bottomland. You do not sell something your grandfather cleared. Did he have business dealings with anyone connected to Monroe Development? Any overlap? Any shared contacts? Any point of contact at all? Dixie shook her head. Wade drove a truck for 20 years. He was gone 3 weeks out of 4. When he came home, he was here on this land. He did not move in the circles where a man like Gregory Monroe operates. Who witnessed the supposed sale, Rex asked. Tucker pointed to the signature block. Jace O'Connor, notary, and a witness listed as H. Blackwood. There is no H. Blackwood I know of in this county, Dixie said, and I spent 31 years in the county records office. I know most everyone who has ever filed a document here. Tucker looked at Rex, a notary who has left town and a witness who may not exist. This document was built by someone who expected it to hold because of who was reading it, not because of what it contained. Meaning the judge was already paid before the document was submitted, Rex said. That would be the efficient way to do it, yes. Bonnie had Winnie in her arms now, the child half asleep, heavy and warm. She looked at Rex across the table. Even if you can prove the signature is wrong, the judge has already ruled, and Ford will enforce it. You have 4 people here. Monroe has the county government. I called for 48 more, Rex said. 48 bikers cannot stop a court order. No, Rex said. They cannot. He looked at her evenly. But 53 people can do things in this county for the next 72 hours that 24 hours ago you could not have done. They can be on the land, They can be witnesses. They can make sure that nothing happens without someone seeing it. He paused. And one of those 53 people spent 7 years reading court documents in Wayne County and knows how to find the information that makes a court order stop mattering. Tucker took off his reading glasses and let them hang on the cord. I need access to the Harlan County property records, digital or physical. The county clerk's office keeps physical records on all transactions since 1963, Dixie said. Digital records start in 2001. She paused. I know the physical system better than anyone in that building. I organized it for 31 years. Is the office open tomorrow? 8 to 4. Then tomorrow morning, Tucker and I walk in there as citizens with a legal right to inspect public records. He looked at the binder. Monroe has not made a clean grab. He has made a careful one. Careful is better than clean. Careful leaves traces. Rex stood from the table. He carried his coffee cup to the counter himself, the automatic courtesy of a man who knew what it meant to clean up after himself in someone else's space. He stood at the window for a moment, looking at the darkened street. How long has Ford been working with Monroe, he said. Dixie thought about it. Ford has been sheriff for 12 years. He was clean when he started, or at least clean enough that no one noticed otherwise. Monroe came to Harlan 4 years ago with the development plans. 4 years ago is also when the first of the other complaints started. Other complaints. Dixie looked at Bonnie. Bonnie looked back at her grandmother. Something passed between them. I am not the only one, Dixie said. There are 3 other families in this county with similar situations. Horace Gallagher lost 6 acres on Pine Creek Road in February. Said the same thing a sale he never made, documents he never signed. He did not fight because he is 82 years old, and his children told him fighting would cost more than the land was worth. She paused. Nora Blackwood, she is 71, a widow on Catron Creek. She received papers last month claiming Wade had co-signed a deed transfer in 2000, which is impossible since Wade and Nora Blackwood had never met. Another pause. And a family named Hendricks. 4 generations on the same 40 acres off Greasy Creek. Last month, their family received a notice that the property belongs to Monroe Development based on a sale from 2002. The room was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the October trees and the sound of it came through the old window frames of the diner, that particular whisper of air, through gaps that said the building was old and had survived many things. 1 man, 1 scheme, 4 families, Tucker said. Probably more we do not know about yet. The county has a lots of old families with old land, Dixie said. A lot of elderly people who would not know how to fight what looks like a legal document, and a lot of land that looks like nothing to someone from Lexington, but is worth considerably more if you are planning to develop the Route 38 corridor. What is on Route 38, Rex asked. Right now, trees and farms and a creek. Dixie's voice was dry. But the state announced 2 years ago that they are widening the highway through here. Commercial development would follow. Land along the corridor that is worth $3,000 an acre today would be worth $30,000 in 5 years. She looked at the binder. Wade's land, the Gallagher acres, Nora Blackwood's land, all of it adjacent to the corridor. Rex looked at the ring on his hand, and now a man in a good suit was using Wade's name to take what he had spent a life building. 19 years of being gone and still not safe from men who understood that the dead cannot argue. Friday, Rex said. Friday, Dixie confirmed. Then we have 3 days. He looked at Tucker. Start with the property records tomorrow. I want every document Monroe has filed in this county since he arrived, every notarization by Jace O'Connor, and every transaction that went through Judge Pierce. He looked at the other 3 members. Dax, you and Harley are on the farm overnight. Nothing comes on that land. Cruz, you are with me in the morning. He looked at Dixie. I would appreciate it if you could show me the parcel in question, the actual ground. Dixie nodded. In the morning. Outside on Main Street, a car rolled slowly past the diner, its headlights painting a brief, bright square across the window before the darkness came back. Rex glanced at it. Black SUV moving at the particular pace of a vehicle whose driver was looking at something rather than going somewhere. That is the 3rd time in the last hour, he said. Dixie looked up. I know. She set a plate on the stack. Since May, I have been watched. Casually but deliberately. Enough to know it is happening. She said it the way you say something you have been carrying alone. When Wade was alive, he would have been furious. He did not tolerate people being watched on their own land. Rex looked at the car until it moved past and its taillights disappeared around the corner. "You are not going to need to handle this alone," he said. Dixie looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has outlived a husband and run a business alone and is therefore not easily impressed, but is occasionally surprised. "Wade would definitely have liked you," she said again. "I hope so," Rex said. "I have been trying for 19 years to deserve the ring." She turned back to the dishes. The first of the Forged Saints arrived at 4 in the morning. Rex heard the bikes before he was fully awake, the sound of engines coming down from the north on US 25, a sound like distant thunder that resolved slowly into something more specific, more organized, the particular rhythm of multiple motorcycles riding together in formation. He was up and at the window before the first headlight turned onto Main Street. They came in pairs the way Forged Saints always rode, and the street absorbed them one by one until 48 motorcycles were lined along the curb in front of Dixie's counter engines, going quiet one after another in the pre-dawn stillness of Harlan, Kentucky. The sound of that quiet after the sound of the engines was considerable. Zane Bishop was first through the door. He was 57 and built like a man who had worked outdoors his entire life, which he had, and he had a face that suggested he had found most of what life offered to be roughly what he expected. He shook Rex's hand with the grip of a man who means it. "Brought the whole house," Zane said. "I know, I counted." "You want to tell me the full picture," Rex told him. Standing in the dark diner with the smell of cold coffee and cornbread, Rex told Zane everything that had happened since he had pulled off US 25 and seen the coaster under his coffee cup with the Riggs name on it. Zane listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without shifting his weight, without the small, performative gestures of engagement that most people used to prove they were paying attention. He simply paid attention. When Rex was finished, Zane stood for a moment in the specific silence of a man who has heard something and is deciding what it means. "Wade Riggs," he said. "The same. You have been wearing that ring for 23 years. 23 years and 4 months. Zane nodded slowly. "Then we are exactly where we should be." By 8:53, men had eaten, the logistics of the next 3 days had been established, and Dixie had come downstairs to find the diner full of motorcycle men she did not know behaving like guests who understood how guests behaved. She looked at the situation and did not comment on it. She went into the kitchen and began making eggs. 10 members went to the farm enough to have a constant visible presence. 8 members went to each of the 3 other affected properties to explain who they were and what they were doing. Tucker left for the county clerk's office at 2 minutes after 8 with his reading glasses and his notepad and the quiet certainty of a man who knows exactly what he is looking for. Rex and Zane took the road to the Riggs farm with Dixie. It was the kind of morning that made you understand why people built their lives in places like this. The sun was coming up through the trees, striking the cold air at an angle that turned everything it touched to something resembling gold. And the road to the farm ran along a creek that moved quickly over flat gray stones, making the particular sound of water that has been making that sound for longer than anyone alive to hear it. The farm itself sat at the end of a gravel drive that curved through a stand of maples and came out into an open space of fields and old fencing and a farmhouse that had been added to slowly over decades. Dixie walked Rex out to the eastern boundary of the property. The land in question was 9 acres of bottomland along the creek, flat and dark, with the particular richness of soil that has been good soil for a long time. An old fence line marked where the Riggs land ended. The fence was 50 years old and had been mended in places the original posts replaced, where they had rotted new wire run alongside old wire. The whole thing a document of continued maintenance, of someone continuing to care. "Wade put this fence up," Dixie said. She stood at a post that had been replaced recently, new wood lighter than the old. He had to replace this section in 2004. Bad winter. She touched the post with one hand. "I replaced the next 3 in 2019. Same run of fence." Rex looked at the land, at the creek beyond the fence, at the trees along the opposite bank already in their fall colors, the whole thing sitting there in the morning light, the way it had sat for 60 years. "He did not sell this," Rex said. "He did not sell an inch of anything." Her voice was as simple and definite as a fence post. "Wade believed that land was a responsibility. You held it, you tended it, you passed it on. Selling it to a developer would have been like selling one of his children. It was not a thing he would have done for any price." They walked back to the farmhouse. 10 Forged Saints members were stationed at various points around the property, some visible, some not, all of them present in the way that mattered. Inside, Dixie led Rex to the kitchen table. She sat him down and brought out a shoebox from the bedroom full of papers that seemed important enough to keep but not organized enough to file properly. She went through it with the deliberate care of a woman who has looked through these papers many times. She found what she was looking for near the bottom. A letter in Wade's handwriting dated October 2002, 2 months before he died. Rex read it. It was addressed to no one in particular, the kind of letter a man writes when he is thinking something through not planning to send it, but needing to put it into words in order to hold it. It described a man Wade had met in Detroit, a young man in trouble in a bar a night in an emergency room. Wade described giving the man a ring. He wrote about why. I hammered it from a piece of iron pipe because I needed something to do with my hands. I gave it to this boy because he looked like he needed something solid to hold on to. Something that would not pretend to be what it was not. Iron does not pretend. I hope he finds his way somewhere honest. I hope someday he stops for someone else the way I stopped for him. That is how these things travel. That is how they are supposed to travel. Rex set the letter down. He did not pick it up again. He thought about the specific things Wade Riggs had said in that letter. About the ring, about the traveling. He thought about the 19 years between that night in Detroit and this kitchen table in Kentucky. About every decision in those 19 years that had been made differently because of what happened in that emergency room, the direction altered by 6 hours with a man who stopped. Can I take a photograph of this? He said. You can have the original. No, this belongs here. He raised his phone and photographed the letter, the handwriting, the date, the specific angle of every letter. Then he photographed the signature. Then he sent the photographs to Tucker. Tucker called back in 11 minutes. The property records are a mess, Tucker said. His voice had the particular quality it took on when he was in the middle of finding something and was both pleased about it and furious at what it revealed. Monroe filed 6 property actions in this county in the last 4 years. All 6 were notarized by Jace O'Connor. All 6 went before Judge Pierce. All 6 were ruled in Monroe's favor. That is not a coincidence, Rex said. No. And here is what is not a coincidence in a more specific and legally significant way. A pause, the sound of pages turning. I found the original deed registration for the Riggs Eastern parcel. Filed 1964, updated 1991, updated again in 2005 by Dixie after Wade died. All 3 updates have signatures consistent with Wade Riggs's known writing. The Monroe document claims a sale in 2001. Between 1999 and 2003, there are no amendments filed on that parcel in the county records. No sale notice, no transfer tax, no updated deed registration. Rex was quiet for a moment. They did not bother with the transfer tax because they expected Pierce to rule before anyone looked. That is what I think. They built the documents well enough to win in a friendly courtroom. They did not build them well enough to survive independent scrutiny. A longer pause. There is something else. I found a name in the 2005 deed update. One of the witnesses to the update after Wade's death was a man named Clem Hendricks, from the Hendricks family off Greasy Creek. Rex stood from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The farm lay out in front of him in the morning light. Monroe is not just forging documents. He is using the connections between these families against them, making it look like they were all involved with each other in transactions that never happened. Creating a paper web, Tucker said, each document reinforcing the others. If you accept one, you accept the logic of all of them. A pause. I need the name Jace O'Connor run through every database we have. If he is hiding for a reason. Rex ended the call. He turned to Dixie, who had been listening without pretending not to. Do you have a lawyer contact anywhere in Kentucky? Anyone at all? My friend Patrice has a daughter who is a lawyer in Lexington. Real estate law. I have not called her because I thought the situation was too far gone. Get me the name. I need someone licensed in Kentucky who can file a motion today. The morning moved quickly. Rex's contact in Detroit produced a result within 2 hours. Jace O'Connor had relocated to an address in Knoxville, Tennessee. He had also left something behind, a sealed envelope with a friend in Morristown, with a note on the outside that read, "Open this if anything happens to me or if the right person comes looking." He had not been subtle about his expectation that someone would eventually come looking. Rex called Zane. I need 2 riders on the road to Knoxville, looking for a man named Jace O'Connor. He is expecting to be found. Make sure we are the ones who find him first. Zane put 2 men on the road within the hour. By 2 in the afternoon, Rex was on the phone with Helen Vaughn, the Lexington real estate attorney that Dixie had connected him to. Helen was in her early 50s with the particular flatness in her voice of someone who had been careful about how much she said for long enough that careful had become a style. I have been watching what Monroe has been doing in this county for 8 months, she said. Tell me what you have, Rex told her. She listened. At the end, she was quiet for a moment. The transfer tax gap is significant, she said. That is not something you can backfill. If there is no transfer tax record for 2001, there was no sale in 2001. That is a factual absence in the public record. I can file for an emergency injunction today. Not to reverse Pierce's ruling, but to halt enforcement of the Friday transfer pending an independent evidentiary review. A higher court can be asked to take jurisdiction. She paused. It will help if I have a credible witness to the signature issue. Would a woman who spent 31 years as Harlan County's records clerk, who organized every property filing in the county from 1986 to 2017, and who can testify that no transfer tax was filed for the supposed 2001 sale be sufficient? That woman would be the best possible witness. She is sitting in her kitchen waiting for you to call. By 3:30, Helen Vaughn had filed the emergency injunction application with the Kentucky Court of Appeals. The application included Dixie's affidavit about the missing transfer tax record, the signature inconsistency Tucker had documented, and the concentration of Monroe-related rulings through a single judge as grounds for independent review. At 3:45, a black SUV stopped in front of the diner. Monroe got out. He was alone this time without the two large men. He walked to the door of the diner and found it occupied by 17 members of the Forge Saints MC, who were eating pie and playing cards and not looking at him in the way of people who know exactly who has just walked through a door and have chosen to perform not noticing them. He found Rex at the counter. Monroe's composure was remarkable. Rex gave him that. He sat down on the stool next to Rex as though this were a meeting they had scheduled, and he placed both hands on the counter in the open palm gesture of a man indicating he was not carrying obvious aggression. I understand you have been busy today, Monroe said. I had breakfast, walked some land, made some phone calls, Rex said. Typical Wednesday. The injunction application will not succeed, Monroe said. Helen Vaughn is a real estate attorney. She is not an appellate litigator. Pierce will deny the stay. Pierce does not get to rule on an appeal from his own ruling, Rex said. The Court of Appeals assigns a panel. None of those judges are yours. Something moved in Monroe's expression. Very small, very fast. You have been busy, he said. I told you. Typical Wednesday. Monroe looked around the diner, at the 17 members distributed across it, at Tucker at a corner table with his reading glasses and his notepad. I admire the commitment. I genuinely do. Most people would not bring this kind of response to a property dispute in a county they have no connection to. I have a connection, Rex said. Wade Riggs. Monroe said it the way a man says a name he has researched. You met him once, 19 years ago. He looked at the ring. For a single meeting, it made quite an impression. Some people do that, Rex said. Monroe looked at the counter for a moment. Then he stood from the stool. This is not going to work the way you are imagining. I have been doing this for 4 years. I know this county, I know these courts, and I know the specific limitations of emergency injunctions in the Kentucky Court of Appeals. He paused. Friday is still Friday. He left. The diner was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then Zane from the booth by the window said, he is scared. Everyone looked at him. A man who is not scared does not come in here and tell us it is not going to work, Zane said. He comes in because something we did today scared him. He wanted to see what we know. He looked at Rex. He knows we know something. Rex looked at the door. From Knoxville, 2 hours later came a phone call. The two riders had found Jace O'Connor in an apartment complex off Merchants Drive. He had been expecting someone. Not them specifically, but someone the way a man who has sent a signal into the dark expects eventually to hear something come back. He had asked them one question. Are you from Monroe? No, they had told him. We are from Wade Riggs's wife. He had opened his door immediately. The sealed envelope contained more than any of them had expected. It contained scanned documents of the original unaltered property records for 6 transactions, including the Riggs parcel. It contained email correspondence between Monroe and Pierce spanning 11 months discussing the roading of specific cases, the framing of rulings, the management of timeline. It contained one audio recording, 16 minutes. Monroe's voice unmistakable instructing Jace O'Connor on how to create the appearance of a 2001 sale that had never occurred. And in the middle of that instruction, a sentence that arrived in the diner through a phone speaker held up to 53 men listening in complete silence. The man has been dead for almost 20 years. There is nobody left who can say what he signed and what he did not sign. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Tucker took off his reading glasses. Then Zane looked at Rex. Then Rex said very quietly, "Call Helen Vaughn." Outside the diner windows, the sun was going down through the Kentucky trees. The same colors as the leaves and the contents of a sealed envelope were being sent to a federal field office in Knoxville and to Helen Vaughn's office in Lexington and to 3 separate email addresses held by 3 separate Forged Saints members in 3 separate cities as insurance against anyone thinking about making the evidence disappear. Gregory Monroe had said the man was dead and nobody could say what he had or had not done. He had been wrong about that for 19 years. He was still wrong. At 2 in the morning, the diner caught fire. It started in the back near the kitchen, the way fires start when someone who is not a fool but is also not a professional does something deliberately and tries to make it look accidental. Rex was awake when it started because he was always awake now when things like this were possible. He was through the back door and had the extinguisher from under the counter into the fire before it reached the wall. 2 other Forged Saints members came through the front in under a minute. They put it out. The kitchen had smoke damage and 1 wall would need to be replaced. Nothing structural, nothing that could not be fixed. Rex stood in the smoke-smelling kitchen and looked at the burned wall. Dixie came down the exterior stairs and stood in the doorway. She was wearing her bathrobe, her reading glasses on the chain, her white hair pressed sideways from the pillow. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said Wade built this kitchen in 1995. He was so proud of the work he put into the ventilation. He said a kitchen needed to breathe. She looked at the damaged wall. This is going to need to come out. We will put in a better one, Rex said. She looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has had enough of being patient. Gregory Monroe, she said, is going to pay for this building. Not literally, in the way that matters more than literally. She turned and went back up the stairs. Rex stood in the burned kitchen. He had thought they had until Friday. Monroe had just changed the timeline. The morning after the fire came cold and clear. Rex was outside before 6 with coffee, watching the sky come up over the ridgeline. Zane came out and stood beside him. They did not speak for a few minutes. The cold was the particular Kentucky mountain cold that got inside things. He is going to escalate, Rex said. I know. He has run this scheme for 4 years without significant opposition. He owns the local enforcement apparatus. He has never had to go further than paperwork and a judge and a sheriff who does what he is told. Rex looked at his coffee. We are the first thing that has walked into this county that he cannot buy or court order into compliance. What does he do with things he cannot buy? He burns them, Rex said. Zane looked at the smoke stain along the exterior sill of the back window, faint in the morning light. He made a mistake. Several of them, Rex agreed. But this one specifically, a forged document requires an expert to explain. A building that was deliberately set on fire while the owner was sleeping upstairs requires less explanation. His phone buzzed. Tucker calling rather than texting, which meant something substantive. The injunction was filed at the Court of Appeals yesterday afternoon, Tucker said when Rex answered. I have a contact in Frankfurt who knows the clerk's office. The application was reviewed last night by the duty judge. There is a stay, a temporary stay, but a stay. Friday's enforcement is halted pending a full evidentiary hearing before a 3-judge panel. The hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday. Rex was quiet. There is more, Tucker said. Helen Vaughn called me at 5 this morning. She received the audio files and she submitted a supplementary motion last night. She cited the recording as evidence of judicial corruption requiring immediate escalation. The FBI field office in Lexington received a copy at the same time. She has a contact there from a previous case. How long before Monroe knows about the stay? He will know when his attorney checks the court docket this morning, by 9 o'clock at the latest. Then we have until 9 o'clock before his next move. He ended the call. He turned to Zane. Get everyone off the road and onto the properties. All of them. If anything is going to happen, it is going to happen in the next few hours before Monroe adjusts to the new situation. Zane moved. The parking lot activated. Men who had been resting became men with a destination in minutes. the practiced efficiency of a group that had been doing this long enough to not need a lot of instruction. Rex went inside to find Dixie. She was in the kitchen, which had the smell of smoke and the look of a place where work had been assessed. She was standing in front of the damaged wall with her reading glasses on, looking at it the way a person looks at something they have decided to fix rather than mourn. A notepad on the counter, a pencil in her hand. New framing, she said without looking at him. 3 studs and new drywall. The ventilation is intact, which is the most important part. She made a note. I have done this kind of repair before. Dixie, Rex said. She looked at him. The enforcement is stayed. Friday is not happening. The Court of Appeals has ordered a full hearing for next Wednesday. She held very still. The pencil in her hand stopped moving. The audio recording from O'Connor's envelope was submitted to the FBI in Lexington last night. She set the pencil down on the counter. She did not make any of the sounds that people sometimes made when they heard good news. She was very quiet for a long moment. The farm is safe, she said. For now, Rex said. Temporarily safe with the permanent decision coming Wednesday. But yes, for now. Dixie Riggs put both hands flat on the kitchen counter and closed her eyes. She stood that way for 10 seconds. Then she opened her eyes, picked up the pencil, and went back to her notepad. Then we have work to do before Wednesday, she said. And this wall is not going to fix itself. Rex did not say anything. He looked at the pencil in her hand and the notepad on the counter and the woman who had been holding the line in this building for 6 months alone. He thought of Wade in the cold of the shop, hammering iron at a pipe. I will get you someone who can do the framing, Rex said. I know you will. She wrote something on the pad. Now go make sure my farm is still standing. He went. By noon, Monroe had heard about the stay. Rex knew this not because anyone told him, but because the black SUV was absent from Main Street for the first time in 2 days, and the 2 county patrol cars that had been doing slow passes by the diner had also disappeared. The sudden absence of visible pressure was a different kind of pressure, the specific anxiety of knowing someone is planning rather than acting. Daniel Ford came to the farm at 1 in the afternoon. He came alone without the deputy cars in his personal truck. He parked at the end of the gravel drive and walked up it with his hands visible in the particular way of a man who wants to be very clear. He is not a threat. He was 57, heavy across the shoulders with the face of a man who had made decisions over the years that he had not entirely made peace with. 12 Forge Saints members watched him come up the drive. None of them moved to intercept him. They watched. Rex met him at the farmhouse porch. Ford looked at the members positioned around the property. He looked at Rex. He had the manner of a man who has lost enough sleep to have gotten past the state where more sleep would help. I heard the recording, he said. He did not mean recently. He meant the file Rex had shown him at the diner the day before. All of it this time. Not just my name, all of it. Rex waited. I have done things in this county that I should not have done, Ford said. He was not looking at Rex. He was looking at the farmhouse, the porch, the land around it. Not violent things, not things that hurt anybody directly. But I took money and I looked away, and I told myself the property matters were above my jurisdiction, and it was all a civil matter. A pause. It is not a civil matter when you are standing in a man's kitchen at 6 in the morning with a removal order while he is crying. No, Rex said. It is not. I did that. In March. To Horace Gallagher on Pine Creek Road. Ford put his hands in his pockets. He is 82 years old. He cried. He did not say anything. He just cried. A longer pause. I have thought about that man crying every day since March. Rex looked at him. I am going to call the FBI in Lexington, Ford said. Today, I am going to tell them everything I know. What I was paid, how many times, what I was told to do, and what I did. He looked at Rex now. I will lose my job. I may face charges, but I will not keep doing what I have been doing. Rex looked at the man for a long moment. Horace Gallagher is 82 years old, Rex said. He should not have had to cry in front of you. No, Ford said. He should not have. Go make your call, Rex said. Ford nodded. He turned and walked back down the gravel drive. At the end of it, he got in his truck. He sat there for a full minute. Then he drove away. By 4 in the afternoon, the FBI had made contact with Helen Vaughn directly. By 5, they had made contact with Ford. By 6, Rex had a call from Vaughn herself. They are moving, she said. Not public yet, but moving. The audio is the kind of evidence that makes things move fast. The transfer tax gap is documentary proof. Ford's cooperation is the thing that makes it rapid. She paused. I want to manage your expectations. This is not a process that ends tomorrow, but it is a process that has begun and that will reach a conclusion. Another pause. Dixie Riggs's land is not going anywhere. Rex looked at the farm around him, at the fence line along the creek that Wade had built and Dixie had maintained, at the trees that had turned in the October cold. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said. "I have been watching this county for 8 months. I needed someone to walk through the door with the right pieces." He ended the call. He stood in the field. Rex walked the Riggs farm alone that afternoon. He went out the back of the farmhouse and followed the fence line south the direction the bottomland took before it curved east toward the county road. The light was doing what October light did in this kind of terrain, striking the ground at an angle that made the grass look lit from inside the particular amber of fields in a season that was ending. He walked without hurrying. He was not inspecting. He was simply moving through the space the way you move through a space that you needed to understand in some way beyond the tactical. Wade Riggs had walked this ground every day of his life that he was home. 1 week in 4 for 20 years of trucking, and then not even that because the accident came before retirement. He had walked this fence line and checked these posts and known every low place where water pooled in spring and every high place where the deer came through in October. He had known this land the way you knew things that you had not studied, but simply been. Rex stopped at a section of fence where 2 different generations of repair were visible side by side. Wade's original post weathered gray, the wire attached with staples that had gone green with oxidation. And beside it, a newer post treated wood still holding its color wire attached with different hardware, the same job done twice at different times by different hands, both of which had been trying to accomplish the same thing. He stood there for a while. He thought about the phone number in his contacts. Janet, his daughter, 30 years old, living in Columbus. She used her mother's last name, the name she had grown up with, not the name Rex had given her. Rex had known he had a daughter for 30 years. He had known where she was in a general way for most of them. He had not known her specifically, had not looked specifically, because looking specifically was a thing he had told himself he was not entitled to do. He had left when she was 4. Not because he wanted to leave, but because he had been the kind of man he had been at 30, and being the kind of man he had been had made staying the wrong choice for the people he would have stayed with. He had changed. He knew that. The change had begun in a Detroit emergency room and continued for 23 years. But knowing you had changed and presenting that change to a person who had grown up without you were different things. He thought about Wade Riggs driving trucks and coming home. He thought about a 4-year-old named Winnie touching an iron ring with 2 fingers carefully, with the attention of a child who recognizes something without knowing why. He turned from the fence and walked back toward the farmhouse. Wednesday came the way significant days come ordinary in its arrival, and extraordinary in what it contained. The drive to Frankfort was 3 hours. Rex rode with Tucker in the truck, the bike left at the diner for the cold morning. Zane and 3 other members came with them. The rest stayed in Harlan. On the drive, Tucker read documents. Rex drove and watched the Kentucky morning come up through the hills and valleys of the eastern part of the state, the particular beauty of a place that had never tried to be beautiful. That was beautiful because it was honest. The hearing in Frankfort lasted 45 minutes. Helen Vaughn presented the evidence. The transfer tax absence, the signature inconsistency with authenticated samples from Dixie's affidavit, the email correspondence, the audio recording, Ford's testimony submitted in affidavit form. The 3-judge panel asked 5 questions, all of them directed at the scope of the original Pierce rulings rather than at the evidence itself, which told Helen and everyone in the room that the panel had already read the submission carefully. The ruling came at 11:20. All 6 of Gregory Monroe's property actions were vacated. The Riggs parcel, the Gallagher acreage, Nora Blackwood's land, the Hendricks family property, and 2 other properties Rex had not known about until the full scope of Monroe's scheme was laid out in the federal filing. All of it was returned to the families to whom it belonged. Judge Pierce was referred for judicial conduct review. The FBI investigation of Monroe on federal charges was formally noted in the ruling. Helen Vaughn shook Rex's hand outside the courthouse. She allowed herself one moment. There are 6 families in Harlan County who are going home to land that belongs to them, she said. That is not a small thing. No, Rex agreed. It is not. He called Dixie from the courthouse steps. She answered on the second ring. He told her he used the specific words vacated, returned, permanent yours. He kept his voice level because she deserved the information delivered clearly. She was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the phone. Then she said, "Come home. I am making dinner." They arrived at the diner at 4 in the afternoon. The smell reached them through the truck windows before they got to the parking lot. Dixie had been cooking since the phone call. 53 men ate in the diner that evening, and Dixie and Bonnie and Winnie and Horace Gallagher, who had driven over from Pine Creek Road, because Dixie had called him, and Nora Blackwood, who had come from Catron Creek, and 2 members of the Hendricks family who arrived together in an old pickup and stood in the doorway of the diner for a moment, taking in the scene before coming inside. There was something in the way they stood there, something like disbelief mixed with gratitude that moved through the room without being said. Winnie fell asleep in Bonnie's arms at 7:30. Bonnie carried her to the back of the diner and laid her on the cot there, and she slept with the depth of a child who has been thoroughly expended. Later in the evening, after the plates were cleared and the coffee was on its 3rd pot, Dixie brought something to the table where Rex was sitting, a small framed photograph. 2 men standing outside a building. One of them was younger, mid-30s, wearing a leather vest. The other was older, 50s, a working man's build, a face that was tired and patient and open. Between them, the distance of 2 people who did not know each other well, but were standing close because the moment called for it. Outside a hospital, Detroit Medical Center. The timestamp in the corner said 4:12 a.m., a date in November 2004. Bonnie found this in a box of Wade's things last spring, Dixie said. When Monroe first appeared, she paused. I always thought it was just a photograph he had for some reason. I did not understand it until tonight. Rex looked at the photograph for a long time, at the younger version of himself, the man he had been at 35. He looked at Wade Riggs beside him, at the specific expression on Wade's face, which was the expression of a man who has done a simple thing and is not making anything more of it than it was. Rex's hand was not steady when he picked up the photograph. He was aware of it, and he did not try to hide it. There was no one here who would hold it against him. "Thank you," he said. Dixie sat down across from him. She was wearing the same green apron she had worn every day, though she had changed the blouse underneath. Her reading glasses were on their chain. She was 69 years old, and she had the manner of a woman who had arrived somewhere after a long journey and recognized the destination. "He would have been pleased," she said. "Not that you came specifically, but that someone did, that the kind of person he believed existed." She folded her hands on the table. Wade was not a man who needed to be right about things, but he was always glad when he was. Rex looked at the photograph, then at the ring, then at the photograph again. Janet. The name sat in his contacts like a question he had not yet answered. He thought about a 4-year-old girl he had left behind and a 30-year-old woman he did not know. He thought about the distance between those 2 facts and whether 23 years of traveling in a better direction was the kind of thing that could cross it. He did not know. You could not know a thing like that until you tried. And trying required making the call, and making the call required accepting that she might not want to answer it, and that if she did not want to answer it, that was a consequence he had no standing to argue with. But the direction had been changing for 23 years, and you could not keep changing direction without eventually arriving somewhere. He put the photograph in his inside vest pocket, against his chest where it would ride through whatever roads came after this one. The next morning, the Forge Saints prepared to leave. 53 motorcycles lined the street in front of Dixie's counter engines, running the sound of them filling Main Street and rolling down toward the ridge. The smoke stain on the back wall had been covered with new drywall framed and hung by 6 members who between them had enough combined years of construction work to do the job correctly. It was solid work, the kind that would hold. Dixie stood in front of her diner. Bonnie stood beside her, Winnie on her hip, awake and present the small observer she always was. Rex stood with his helmet in his hand. He looked at Dixie. There were things you could say at a moment like this, and things that were too large for saying. He had spent 23 years being a man of action, more than of words. It had served him. The last thing Wade wrote in that letter, Dixie said before Rex could say anything at all, was a sentence I have thought about many times. She was looking at the ring on his hand. He wrote, "I hope someday he finds his way back to something worth riding toward." That is all. Just that. Rex looked at her. "I think," Dixie said, "that means something different to you now than it might have meant the first time someone told it to you." "Yes," Rex said, "I think it does." She held her hand out. He shook it, and she let it hold for a moment, the grip of a woman who had held things her whole life and knew what holding meant. Horace Gallagher came forward. He was 82 years old, and he had cried in his kitchen in front of a sheriff in March, and he was standing on this morning on land that was his. He shook Rex's hand with both of his and said nothing. He did not need to. Nora Blackwood, who was 71 and direct, said, "You and your people can come back to Harlan County anytime. There will always be a meal and a chair." Zane had mounted up. The engines ran, 52 bikes waiting. Rex put his helmet on. He looked at Winnie on her grandmother's hip. She was looking at him with the dark eyes that held everything and gave nothing away, the same eyes she had turned on the ring the first day. She lifted one small hand and waved. He waved back. Then he mounted up and took the front of the line the way he always took the front. Not because it was a position of importance, but because someone had to be in front, and he had been doing it long enough that his place there had stopped being a decision and become simply a fact. He pulled out onto Main Street. 52 bikes followed. The town of Harlan rolled past on both sides. The buildings, the ridge line, the October trees and their colors. The corner where Monroe's office had been dark, now the sign in the window that said Monroe Development Partners visible for only a moment before it was behind them, and the road opened up and the north end of town gave way to the highway. He opened the throttle. US 25 stretched out ahead of him through the hills and the valleys and the rivers of eastern Kentucky all the way north to where it joined the larger roads that went on from there to wherever the road went when you were not yet sure of the destination, only the direction. In his inside pocket against his chest, a photograph of two men standing outside a hospital in Detroit at 4:12 in the morning, kept 19 years in a dead man's belongings, given finally to the person it had always been for. He rode. At the edge of the county where the highway straightened and the ridge fell away to the west, and you could see for a long way in both directions, Rex reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a contact. Janet. He looked at the name for a moment. The road went north. The October morning was cold and clear, and the light on the hills was the light of a day that was going to be what it was going to be. Not more than that, but not less a day on the right road. He pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She picked up. The road went on through the hills of Kentucky. The 52 bikes behind him made their particular sound the sound of people who had come when called and were going home, the way people go home when they have done the thing they came to do. The hills on both sides were the color of October, which is the color of things that are beautiful because they are changing, because they are not trying to be permanent, because they are exactly what they are at exactly the moment they are it. Rex Donovan rode north with the phone at his ear and an iron ring on his hand and a photograph against his chest of a man who had stopped for him once on a night that he should not have survived. And on the other end of the phone, a woman 30 years old said the word hello for the first time in her life in the direction of her father. The road stretched out ahead. Some debts took 23 years to begin to pay. Some doors took that long to reach. Some words had been accumulating their weight for decades, heavy with everything that had not yet been said, and when they finally came, they were not elaborate. They were not the kind of words that required preparation. He had come a long way to get to the word that came next. He said it. He said it simply the way Wade Riggs had done everything without making it into more than it was, which was already more than enough. Hello. 3 weeks after the Forge Saints left Harlan County, Helen Vaughn filed the formal restoration documents with the county records office. The Riggs eastern parcel, 9 acres of bottomland along the creek, was officially, permanently, and without dispute returned to the Riggs family. The filing included a notation citing the documentary evidence that had overturned the fraudulent Pierce ruling, and it included in the supporting materials a copy of the transfer tax records from 2001 showing no sale had occurred. Dixie had asked Helen Vaughn to make sure the full history was visible in the public record. She did not want the story buried. She wanted it visible the way a scar is visible, not for vanity, but because a scar is proof that something happened and that you are still here. Gregory Monroe was indicted on federal charges in November. 14 counts across the 6 property actions, including wire fraud conspiracy to commit property fraud, obstruction of justice, and a separate count related to the fire at Dixie's Diner. The investigation had expanded to 3 other rural Kentucky counties where Monroe had been operating the same scheme with different local officials. The full scope of it was larger than anyone in Harlan had known. He was ultimately convicted on 11 counts. His sentence was 16 years. Judge Andrew Pierce was removed from the bench. The judicial conduct proceedings took 4 months. He resigned before the formal removal order was issued and was subsequently charged with 3 counts of accepting bribes in his judicial capacity. Daniel Ford lost his position as sheriff. His cooperation agreement protected him from criminal charges, but the county commission moved to remove him following the guilty plea in the Pierce case. He did not contest it. He moved away from Harlan County. Horace Gallagher, who was 82 years old and had not forgotten what happened in his kitchen in March, received a letter 3 months later. It said, "Only I am sorry for what I allowed to happen. I should have been better." Horace kept the letter. Jace O'Connor testified at Monroe's trial. He was the most effective witness against Monroe, not because his testimony was the most dramatic, but because it was the most specific and the most complete. He had kept records of everything with the thoroughness of a man who had known from the beginning that the day might come when documentation was the only thing standing between him and consequences he had not entirely chosen. He was not a hero. He was a man who had made bad choices for money and then made a different choice when the fear finally outweighed everything else. But the different choice mattered. The county of Harlan benefited from it. The kitchen at Dixie's counter was finished in November. 6 Forge Saints members came back from Detroit to complete the work that had been started during the week of the crisis. They came without announcement, arrived on a Saturday morning, worked through the weekend, and left on Monday. Dixie fed them every meal and said nothing about the work except thank you, which was the correct amount to say. On the corner table, the one with sightlines to both the door and the counter, Dixie had placed a small hand-lettered sign, cardstock, and a marker framed in a wooden frame she had in a back drawer. It said, "Wade's Table." That was all. Not a story, not an explanation. Just a name. The name of the man who had built the diner in 1991 and left it to her and left the world to her when he died, and whose name was woven into this place in every beam and board. Rex called Dixie every 2 or 3 weeks. Not on a schedule the way you call people when you are not performing the relationship, but simply continuing it. They talked about the things that had happened in both places, the weather in Kentucky and the weather in Detroit, the cases that came through Harlan, and the operations of the Forge Saints. They talked about Wade, sometimes the specific things he had done, the specific way he had been the accumulation of small details that were the only way a person survived after the body was gone. Once Dixie asked him how the phone call had gone, he told her, "Not everything, but enough." She was surprised, he said. "Of course she was," Dixie said. "We are talking," he said to him. "Carefully, a few minutes at a time. I am not asking for anything except to be allowed to listen." Dixie was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like a man who learned something important," she said. "I had a good teacher," he said. She did not ask who he meant. She knew who he meant. She knew who had taught him that the first thing you did was stop. The second thing was listen. And the third thing, which was the hardest, was to stay long enough to do the work and then go home without making a story of it. Wade Riggs had known that his whole life. He had passed it to a stranger in a bar in Detroit. The stranger had built 23 years of a different life from it. And now that life had found its way back to the land Wade had spent his whole life protecting, and the land was still standing and the diner was still open, and the fence line along the creek that Wade had put up and Dixie had maintained was still there, mended in places, solid, doing the work it was made to do. On a morning in late November, Dixie opened the diner at 7 the way she always did. The coffee was on. The cornbread was in the oven. The cold came through the old window frames the way it always came. She went to Wade's table and wiped it down and straightened the sign and moved the coaster to the center where it belonged. Riggs Family Farm, established 1958. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the table. Outside on Main Street, a single motorcycle came up US 25 from the south, moving slowly, the particular pace of someone who is looking at a town and deciding whether to stop. It passed the diner, slowed, pulled to the curb. Dixie watched through the window. She did not know who it was. It did not matter who it was. What mattered was what happened next, which was the door. And whether someone opened it, and whether, if they did, there would be someone inside who was willing to stop. There always was. That was the thing about this place. The thing Wade had built into it when he built it into the walls and the ventilation and the corner table with sightlines to the door. He had made a place where people could stop. She went to the counter. She picked up the coffee pot. She waited. The bell above the door made its sound. Some things hold. Some things stay. The ones who stopped made sure of it. Rex slept that first night on a cot in the back of the diner, a thing Dixie produced from a storage room along with 2 blankets and the matter-of-fact tone of a woman who considered this a reasonable solution and was not going to discuss it further. Zane and 3 other early arrivals set up in the truck, switching watch in 2-hour rotations. Tucker and the remaining member got the 2 rooms at the Harlan Rest the Motel 3 miles north because Tucker needed the table space and a reliable outlet for the laptop he had pulled from his saddlebag. Rex lay on the cot for a while and did not sleep. The building made its sounds. Old buildings were like old people in that way, full of small complaints about the cold small shifts and settlings that were the physical record of years. He could hear the refrigerator in the kitchen cycling. He could hear the wind outside finding the gap in the back door frame that Dixie had stuffed with a rolled dish towel, a solution so practical it told you everything about the woman. He was thinking about Wade Riggs driving trucks across America for 20 years. 3 weeks gone and 1 week home. The math of that life, the loneliness of it and the dedication of it, the particular sacrifice of a man who chose a hard way of making a living because it was honest and because the paycheck kept a farm and a family together. Coming back to Kentucky each time, the way all such men came back tired in the bones, grateful for the ground under his feet, ready to sit at his kitchen table and hammer iron in the evenings, in the cold of the shop, and know that what he was protecting was worth protecting. And then Wade Riggs had stopped in a Detroit bar on a night in 2004 and found a situation that he did not have to involve himself in. He was 57 years old. He had a bad knee from a loading dock accident in 2000. He was tired from 2 weeks on the road. He could have kept walking. Most people would have kept walking. The math of the situation, one stranger's trouble, the risk, the time, the inconvenience worked out to walking. Wade had not walked because Wade Riggs was a man raised to stop. That was all the explanation he ever gave. His wife ran a diner. She would have been ashamed of him otherwise. He had said it without apology, the way a man states a simple fact about his own character. Rex had been a man going in a direction that likely ended badly. He had known that about himself, then knew it the way. You know a road is heading somewhere you do not want to go, but you stay on it because you have been on it long enough that getting off feels harder than going forward. The direction had changed that night. Not instantly and not completely, but the change began there in the specific warmth of being stopped for by a stranger who had nothing to gain from it. He had built something from that change. A club, a purpose. 23 years of being the kind of people who stopped for other people who showed up, who held the line when the line needed holding. 53 men who came when called, not because they had to, but because they had each in their own way, arrived at the same place Rex had arrived at in that emergency room, the understanding that the only debt that mattered was the one you owed to the moment you had been given to do something with. He had never gone back to Wade Riggs. He had told himself it was because he did not know how, and that was partly true. He had told himself it was because Wade had not seemed to want thanks, and that was also true. But the full truth was that Rex had been afraid that going back would reveal that he had not yet become the person that Wade Riggs had spent a night in an emergency room believing he could become. He looked at the ceiling of the diner storeroom. His phone buzzed. A message from Zane. All 48 rolling. First group arriving by 4. He was driving through the dark from Detroit with 47 other people because Rex Donovan had said the words, "Forge is lit," because they had each heard the story of Wade Riggs enough times that his name was woven into the identity of the club the way the iron was woven into the ring. Because the Forge and the Saints were not a metaphor. They were a real thing. They had a weight. And tonight was the night it would be paid. Rex set the phone down. The refrigerator cycled off. In the silence, the building settled once more, a small sound, like the contented sigh of a thing that has been standing a long time and expects to stand a long time more. He closed his eyes. Down the road, the first headlights of 48 motorcycles were beginning to cross the county line, coming from the north on US 25 in the dark, in the cold in the October night, carrying the only currency that had ever mattered to any of them. The ones who showed up, the ones who stopped. Friday was coming, and so was the Forge. The afternoon light was going amber and deep. Somewhere on the property, Dixie was likely in the kitchen of the farmhouse thinking about dinner, the way she thought about all practical things, which was efficiently and without unnecessary sentiment. Somewhere, Tucker was at a table in the Harlan Rest with his reading glasses and his notepad and a stack of photocopied county records, finding the threads that would unravel Monroe's paper web one document at a time. Rex had been asked once years ago by a journalist writing a piece about the Forge Saints MC what the name meant. He had answered directly, which was that the forge was the fire that made the metal useful and the saints were the people who stayed near the fire long enough to be changed by it. The journalist had written something different, something that made it sound more cinematic, which was the journalist's job and not Rex's problem. But the answer Rex had given was the true one. Some fires changed you. The question was whether you stayed near long enough to be changed in the direction of useful. Wade Riggs had been that kind of fire. Not dramatic, not visible from a distance. The kind that you had to stand next to in a cold shop on a November night in Detroit to feel it all. But the kind that lasted. The kind that shaped what it touched into something that held. Rex was what the fire had made of him. He hoped it was worth the iron. The meal that evening in the diner had the quality of meals that follow significant days, not celebratory exactly because the day was not done, but warm in the way of people who have been through something together and are still in it, but are also for this hour fed and together and alive. Tucker had come back from the Harlan rest with a thick folder of photocopied documents in the specific manner of a man who had found what he was looking for and was prepared to explain it methodically. He spread the documents across the table after dinner and went through them for Rex and Zane and Bonnie in sequence the way he had gone through documents in court for 7 years, starting from the most foundational fact and building outward. The most foundational fact was the transfer tax. Dixie had known it instantly because she had organized those records herself for 31 years. Tucker had confirmed it by pulling the complete transfer tax ledger for Harlan County from 2000 through 2003 and going through it entry by entry. There was no entry for the Riggs parcel. There was no entry for the Gallagher acreage. There was no entry for the Blackwood land or the Hendricks property. 4 separate supposed sales in a 4-year window. All of them involving the same developer, all of them missing from a public record that had no mechanism for deletion. You could not backfill a transfer tax record. The absence was permanent, and it was documentary proof. The second fact was the notary. Jace O'Connor had notarized all 6 of Monroe's property claims. Tucker found his notary commission in the state records valid from 2018 to 2023, issued at an address that turned out to be Monroe's Lexington office. He had been employed by Monroe when he received his commission. He had notarized documents on behalf of his employer. The conflict of interest was not illegal on its face, but in combination with everything else, it described a system rather than a coincidence. The third fact was the judge. Tucker had pulled every property ruling Andrew Pierce had issued in the last 4 years. 31 rulings total. Of those 31, 6 were Monroe-related cases. All 6 had been ruled in Monroe's favor on the first motion without requesting additional evidence, without granting the opposing party additional time to respond, without the standard procedural delays that characterize Pierce's rulings in every other type of case. 6 cases, same pattern, no variance. Courts did not work that way naturally. Courts that worked that way had been designed to work that way. Bonnie listened to all of this with the focused attention of a woman who had been living inside this situation for 6 months and was finally getting the explanation she had been waiting for. She asked Tucker 2 questions, both of them precise, both of them about timeline. He answered both. She nodded and said nothing more, but her posture changed slightly, the particular physical adjustment of a person whose uncertainty has been replaced by something more solid. Winnie slept through the entire explanation in Bonnie's arms, unaware that the documentation of the attempt to steal her great-grandmother's land was being laid out on a table 2 feet from her head. Dixie sat at the end of the table and listened without expression. She had known all of this in a general way since May. Knowing it generally and hearing it documented specifically were different things. When Tucker finished, she was quiet for a moment. Wade spent 30 years being careful about this land, she said. She was not looking at the documents. She was looking at the ring on Rex's hand. He kept the property taxes paid. He kept the fence up. He kept the record straight. A pause. He drove trucks across this country for 20 years to keep it straight. Tucker gathered the documents back into the folder. Whoever made those fake documents, Dixie said, knew enough about the system to make them look right at a surface level. But they did not know the system the way I know the system. She picked up her coffee cup. I spent 31 years in that records office. I know where every document lives and what it looks like when it is real, and what it looks like when something is missing that should be there. She set the cup down. The transfer tax is missing. That is not an oversight. That is a gap that someone hoped nobody would look at. Somebody looked, Tucker said. Somebody looked. Dixie agreed. She glanced at Rex. Because somebody stopped. The room was quiet for a moment. Because somebody stopped. The words sat on the table among the empty dishes and the coffee cups, like something solid, something that had weight. Rex thought about the number of times a thing could be expressed in words and still not be done being expressed. Some things required more passes. Some things had enough in them to fill 19 years of living and still have something left to say. Outside Main Street in Harlan had gone quiet with the October evening. A single light was on in the building across the intersection where Monroe's office sat, a light behind frosted glass, the silhouette of a figure moving. Someone working late. Someone going through their own documents the way people went through documents when they understood that the structure they had built was being examined from the outside and might not survive the examination. Rex watched the light for a moment. He thought about all the miles between that office and the farm 3 miles up Route 38. He thought about the fence line along the bottomland, the old posts and the new posts side by side, the same boundary maintained by different hands across different decades. He thought about what it meant to maintain a boundary, not to own it, not to possess it, to maintain it, to keep showing up and replacing the post that had rotted and running the new wire parallel to the old wire and checking the tension and going home and coming back and checking again. That was what the Riggs family had been doing for 60 years. That was what the Forge Saints had driven through the night to help them keep doing. The light in Monroe's office went out. Rex turned from the window and went back to the table. Tomorrow morning, Tucker would be at the county clerk's office when it opened. Tomorrow morning, Rex would walk the full perimeter of the farm with Dixie and understand every acre of what was being protected. Tomorrow afternoon, the full 53 would be in position across 4 properties, visible, deliberate, and capable of making certain that whatever came next came with witnesses. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days was enough. The Forge Saints had been built on the understanding that enough time, plus enough people, plus enough willingness to do the unglamorous work was sufficient for most things that needed doing. It was not a philosophy that made good copy for journalists. It was not the kind of thing you put on a vest in silver thread. But it was the thing that was true, and in Rex's experience true, things had a longer range than impressive things and a better accuracy, and they did not require you to be anything other than what you were. He was what he was. He went to sleep on the cot in the back of Dixie's counter, and the building settled around him in the dark, and the refrigerator cycled. And outside on Main Street, the October night held Harlan County in its ordinary silence. And 3 miles up Route 38, the fence line held its boundary along the creek the way it had always held it, patient and unpretentious and absolutely certain of where it stood. Bonnie came to find Rex at the farm the afternoon before the hearing. She had Winnie with her, the child in a knitted hat that was slightly too large, tilted over one ear. They walked out to the fence line along the creek, the 3 of them, because Winnie wanted to see the water, and small children's desires have a gravity that redirects the orbits of adults. They stood at the fence while Winnie looked at the creek with the focused attention of a 4-year-old, which meant that for the moment she was completely still and completely present, and everything in her field of view was the only thing in the world. "My grandfather built this fence," Bonnie said. She was watching Winnie. "He replaced this section twice over the years. Grandma replaced the far posts in 2019. She touched the nearest post with one finger. She always said she was not sure she was doing it right, but she did it anyway because it needed doing." Rex looked at the creek. "I never met him," Bonnie said. "He died before I was born, but Grandma talks about him like he is still here. Not as though he is a ghost, as though he is still somehow the reason things are the way they are." She paused. "Like the fence. She keeps it up because he built it and because the land needs it, but also because keeping it up is a way of keeping him in some kind of conversation with the present." Rex looked at the fence, at the old posts and the newer posts, at the boundary held. He thought about the ring on his hand, about carrying it for 23 years, not as a trophy and not as a burden, but as something more neutral than either of those, a simple reminder that a direction existed, that a direction had been established on a specific night by a specific act, and that the direction had not changed since. He thought about his daughter, about 30 years old and living in Columbus, and carrying a name that was not his, but was entirely hers because she had built her life with it in the years he had not been there to build anything alongside her. About the specific unfairness of a person growing up without something they should have had, and the specific impossibility of going back and providing it retroactively, in the specific question of what you did with the gap when you could not fill it, but also could not pretend it was not there. You did what you could do now. You called, you listened. You did not make demands of the listening. You showed up when it was possible to show up, and you accepted that showing up late was not the same as showing up on time, but was still better than not showing up at all. Winnie reached through the fence toward the water. Bonnie took her daughter's hand, gently redirecting without restricting the particular skill of a mother who has learned the difference. Winnie accepted the redirection with equanimity and turned to look at Rex instead with those dark eyes that held everything and gave nothing away. "Hi," Winnie said. "Hi," Rex said. Winnie pointed at the ring on his hand. She had the directness of very small children who have not yet learned that pointing at things is considered impolite. Rex looked down at the ring, then back at Winnie. He held his hand out toward her. She touched the hammered iron with 2 fingers, carefully with the reverent attention that small children give to things that interest them. She did not pull at it or try to remove it. She just touched it the way you touch something you recognize without being able to say why you recognize it. Bonnie watched this. Rex watched Winnie's hand on the ring for a long moment. "Her great-grandfather made this," he said. Bonnie was very still. "He gave it to me because he believed in stopping for people," Rex said. "He believed it so much that he stopped for a stranger on a night he had no reason to stop, and he sat in an emergency room until morning for a man he had never met and would never see again." He looked at the ring, and then he drove back to Kentucky and went home to this farm and did not make a story of it. He just went home. A pause, that is the hardest part. Not stopping. Stopping is the moment. The hard part is going home afterward and not making it into something, not carrying it like a trophy, just letting it be what it was, a thing you did because it was the right thing to do. Winnie had let go of the ring. She was looking at the creek again. Her attention moved on in the complete and unapologetic way of children. Bonnie did not say anything for a moment. "I think that is what she does with the fence," she said finally. She said it quietly as though she was working it out while she said it. She does not make a story of maintaining it. She just maintains it because it needs doing. She glanced at Rex. "Like you came here. You did not make a story of it. You just came." Rex looked at the October light on the water. "I am still trying to figure out what Wade would have wanted," he said. "Not for this situation. For the way of being in the situation." He was quiet for a moment. He was a man who did not announce his reasons. He just did the thing that needed doing and then went home. "I am still learning how to do it that way." Bonnie looked at him. "You came a long way to learn it from his wife," she said. Rex made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to one. "Yes," he said, "I suppose I did." "Let us go back," he said. "It is getting cold." Bonnie picked up Winnie. They walked back toward the farmhouse along the fence line that Wade had built and Dixie had maintained across the bottomland that Gregory Monroe had tried to take with a piece of paper and a dead man's false signature through the October evening light that lay across the Riggs farm, the way it had laid across every evening for 60 years. Behind them, the creek moved over its stones. It had been moving before the fence was built. It would be moving long after. Some things held, some things stayed. Some things were worth stopping for. A journalist from the Lexington Herald-Leader drove down to Harlan in the spring of the following year to write a feature on the Monroe case and its aftermath. She was 28 years old, thorough in the way that good young journalists are thorough before they get tired, and she had done substantial research before she arrived. She had read the court documents, the FBI filings, the indictment, the testimony. She had read Helen Vaughn's original injunction application with its careful layering of evidence. She sat at Wade's table and drank coffee and talked to Dixie for 2 hours. She asked about the Forged Saints MC. She had found references to them in the court documents, 53 motorcycles stationed at multiple properties. A former court clerk named Tucker Roth cited as having accessed county records. A man named Rex Donovan, named as the witness who could authenticate Wade Riggs's ring as having been given to him personally by Wade before his death. "Why did they come?" she asked. Dixie refilled her coffee. "Because they were asked," she said. "By whom?" "By a man who owed a debt." The journalist waited. When Dixie did not continue, she tried a different angle. "The debt to your husband." "My husband stopped for a stranger once," Dixie said. "He did not ask or anything in return. He just stopped." She set the coffee pot down. The stranger spent 23 years becoming someone who could answer the debt with something real. A pause. That is the whole story. The journalist wrote it down. She wrote it in the way that facts got written down, which was accurately, and what was accurate was this: a man named Wade Riggs had stopped for a stranger. A stranger named Rex Donovan had built 23 years of different choices because of it. And when the moment came that those choices could be pointed at something real, they were pointed at the land that Wade Riggs had spent his life protecting. The article ran in May. It was not long. It was not sensational. It was the kind of piece that got shared by people who read it and felt that it said something true. And those people shared it with others who also felt that it said something true. And it traveled the quiet way that true things traveled, which was not fast or loud, but steady, the way water moved. Rex read it on his phone in a parking lot in Detroit. He read it twice. He sent it to one person. Not to Zane, not to Tucker, not to any of the 53. He sent it to a contact in his phone named Janet. Her reply came 40 minutes later. It said, "He sounds like someone who knew what mattered." Is that where you get it from? Rex looked at that sentence for a long time in the parking lot in Detroit. At what it contained, which was several things layered over each other: the acknowledgement that she had been reading about him, the recognition that the thing in the article was something she was connecting to him, the question at the end that was not really asking whether Wade was the source, but was asking whether Rex was the kind of person the article described. He typed back, "I am trying to be." She sent a single word: "Good." He put the phone in his pocket. He sat on his bike in the parking lot for a moment. The Detroit spring was cold, still the kind of cold that did not want to give up to the season coming, and the sky was the particular gray of a city where the weather happened more severely than in gentler places. He looked at the ring. He had been looking at it differently since Harlan, since Winnie's 2 fingers on the hammered iron, since the photograph from Wade's belongings. He looked at it now not as a debt or a direction, but as something simpler. Something that was just what it was, a thing one man had made with his hands and given to another, traveling the only way gifts traveled, which was forward from the hand that made them into the hands of whoever they ended up with, and from there into whatever those hands built. Wade Riggs had built a diner and a farm and a marriage. He had built 23 years of Forge Saints. He had built at the end the specific possibility of a 30-year-old woman in Columbus who sent one-word text and was willing carefully to hear what her father had to say. You could not plan what a gift would build. You could only give it. Rex started the engine. The city moved past on both sides, familiar and permanent. The city he had grown up in and left, and come back to and left again, and come back to the city that had held an emergency room on a November night in 2004, where 2 men stood outside in the early morning, and one of them had given the other a piece of hammered iron and said, without saying, "Here, take this. Go be the person I can see you could become." He had tried. He was still trying. That was the whole story, and it was enough. In Harlan, Kentucky, on a morning in the following October, a woman named Nora Blackwood, who was 72 years old, drove into town and parked in front of Dixie's counter. She came in, sat at the counter, and ordered coffee. Dixie brought it. They sat together the way women sit together when they have been through something side by side and do not need to talk about it constantly to know it is still between them. Nora looked at the sign on the corner table, Wade's table. "He was a good man," Nora said. "He was," Dixie agreed. "I did not know him well, but I knew of him. This county knew of him." Nora wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The kind of man who was quietly present for a long time and then was gone, and then you noticed how much quieter things were without him. Dixie looked at Wade's table. He would have hated a fuss, she said. He would have been deeply uncomfortable with a table named after him. She smiled slightly, the specific smile of a woman who knows the person she is describing well enough to be certain of the claim. But he would have understood why I did it. He understood why things were done. He just did not always need them done for himself. Nora drank her coffee. Outside Main Street went about its business. The ridge line above the town was in its October colors. One full year turned the same hills and the same trees and the same quality of light that came down through the valleys in October and reminded you that you were in a place that had been here a long time and intended to keep being here. The bell above the door made it sound. A family came in, a couple in their 60s and a teenage girl tourist, from the look of them, passing through on their way somewhere else. They looked around the diner and found it good and sat down in the booth near the window. Dixie brought menus. The teenage girl was looking at the photographs on the wall. She pointed at one, the farm in early spring, the fields just turning green, the farmhouse behind the fence line visible in the distance along the creek. "Is that around here?" she asked. 3 miles up Route 38, Dixie said. It is beautiful, the girl said. Dixie looked at the photograph, at the land that had been held for 60 years and defended and returned and would be held for 60 more. It is, she said. It has always been. She went back to the counter and poured Nora a second cup without being asked, and the diner went about the business of an October morning, which was the same business it had been going about since 1991, which was feeding people and keeping the coffee hot and being the kind of place that people stopped at when they did not know where else to stop. The fence held. The table stayed. The door kept opening. That was all. That was everything. That was exactly enough. Rex called Dixie in December, a month after the sentencing. It was a Thursday evening. He was in the garage off Gratiot Avenue in Detroit, the one the club used for mechanical work, and the smell was the smell of all such places, oil and cold metal, and the particular mineral damp of concrete floors in winter. He sat on a workbench with his phone and the garage quiet around him, the other members gone for the evening, and called Dixie the way he had been calling her without schedule, just when it seemed like the right time. She answered on the third ring with the slightly distracted quality of a woman who has been doing something practical and picked up the phone in the middle of it. He could hear the kitchen sounds behind her, which he had learned to identify over the months of calls, the particular rhythm of Dixie at work in her diner. Monroe got 16 years, Rex said. Heard it came down this afternoon. I heard, Dixie said. She was quiet for a moment. The kitchen sounds continued. Helen Vaughn called me. She was very professional about it. She said it was a significant sentence and that she was pleased with the outcome. Are you, Rex asked? Dixie thought about it in the honest way she thought about things, which was without decoration and without hurrying. Pleased is not quite the right word, she said finally. What I feel is more like what you feel when something heavy you have been carrying for a long time finally gets set down. She paused. It is not joy exactly. It is more like the absence of the weight becoming noticeable for the first time. Rex understood that. The farm is still there, he said. It is still there, she agreed. Bonnie and Winnie were out yesterday afternoon. Winnie wanted to see the creek. She always wants to see the creek. She finds it apparently fascinating. She paused and he could hear the smile in it. She got her boots wet, which I understand is the whole point at 4 years old. Rex thought about Winnie at the fence, 2 fingers on the ring touching something she recognized without knowing why. How is Janet, Dixie asked. Careful, Rex said. We are still being careful. Last week she told me she was going to be in Detroit for a work conference in February. She said she thought maybe we could get coffee. He paused. She said it very casually, like it was something people did all the time. Like it was not the thing she had been deciding whether to say for 3 months. Dixie was quiet for a moment. Are you going to be in Detroit in February? I am going to be in Detroit in February, Rex said. Yes. She made a sound that, in a woman of fewer words, was the equivalent of a smile. They talked for another 20 minutes. About the county, which had a new sheriff, a woman from Lexington who had apparently spent 2 days in Harlan meeting with residents before she took the job, which Dixie considered a promising sign. About Tucker, who had driven down to Harlan the previous weekend to help a family in Letcher County that had contacted him through Horace Gallagher because word had traveled in the way that useful things traveled, which was person to person and without advertisement. About the kitchen, which was running well, the ventilation exactly as it should be, the wall indistinguishable from the original, except that the wood was slightly lighter and the work was slightly more precise. Before they ended the call, Dixie said something Rex carried with him for a long time after. Wade used to say that the things you built with your hands were always going to be there when you were gone, she said. The fence, the kitchen, the diner itself. He said you could see what a person cared about by looking at what they built and whether they built it to last. She paused. I think the same is true of people. You can see what a person cares about by looking at who they brought with them and who they came back for. Rex looked at the ring on his hand, at the hammered iron in the cold of the garage. He thought about 53 people on the road in the dark, about Tucker at the county clerk's office, about Zane at the farmhouse porch, about 2 riders driving 4 hours to Knoxville for a name they had been given, about all the specific people who had done specific things because Rex had said Forge is lit, and those words meant something because of a night in a hospital in 2004. A man was known by who showed up when he called. He hoped what that showed was something close to what Wade would have recognized. Something close to honest. Something that held. Good night, Dixie, he said. Good night, Rex, she said. Drive carefully. He ended the call. He sat in the garage for a while longer, the winter cold pressing in through the gaps in the wall, the way cold pressed into all old buildings, finding the places where the construction was imperfect and making itself known. He did not mind it. He had spent enough time in garages and on roads to be comfortable and cold. The cold reminded you that the world was a real physical place, that the things you were sitting with were also real and physical, that the weight you carried and the debts you owed and the people you were trying to become were not abstractions but actual things with actual mass that you carry through actual weather. He put the phone in his pocket. He put on his jacket, which was heavy enough for Detroit in December and had been for many years. He put on his helmet, which was old and fitted to a specific head and had been through more miles than most vehicles anyone he knew had ever driven. He rolled the bike out of the garage, pulled the door down. The street outside was quiet, the particular quiet of a Detroit winter night, the cold compressing the sound, the street lights making small yellow circles in the dark. He rode home. The ring was cold against his hand through the gloves. He could feel it there, the way you could always feel it, not painfully, just present the way something that has been part of you for a long time becomes part of the way you feel yourself moving through the world. 19 years ago, a man had hammered that ring from an iron pipe in a cold shop in Kentucky and given it to a stranger in a hospital in Detroit. 19 years later, the stranger was riding home through the Detroit winter, carrying it still, and the land the man had died protecting was still standing, and the woman who had tended it in his absence was still tending it. And somewhere in Columbus, a 30-year-old woman had said, "I think maybe we could get coffee." And somewhere in Harlan, a 4-year-old named Winnie was getting her boots wet at a fence line her great-grandfather had built. The things you built lasted. The things you built with honest hands and honest purpose, tended by people who understood why they had been built, those things lasted. The forge produced something real. The Saints tried to deserve it. Rex Donovan rode through the Detroit winter and thought about coffee in February, and thought about the fence line along the creek in October, and thought about how far a single act of stopping could travel before it was done traveling. He did not know the answer to that last one. He suspected it was farther than anyone could follow. He hoped it was. In the months that followed, Harlan County did not forget what had happened, but it also did not make a monument of it. Small counties in eastern Kentucky were not places that built monuments easily. They built fences and kept them up and fed their neighbors when there was something to feed them with, and that was the kind of remembering they knew best. Dixie's counter stayed open. The cornbread stayed good. Wade's table in the corner stayed where it was, a simple sign on a simple table, and people who knew what it meant sat there sometimes, and people who did not know what it meant sat there too, and were served the same coffee either way, which was what Wade would have wanted. Horace Gallagher, who was 82 years old and had cried in his kitchen alone in March, planted a new section of apple trees on his Pine Creek acreage in April. He had been putting it off for 3 years, not because of the money, though the money had been tight, but because a man does not plant apple trees on land he is not certain he will keep. He planted 40 trees in 2 rows along the creek bottom, the kind of planting that would take 7 years to bear fruit, the kind of planting that was a statement about the future. He was 82 years old, and he planted 40 apple trees, and he did not make a story of it. Nora Blackwood drove into town the morning after she heard about the planting and sat at the counter at Dixie's counter and told Dixie about it, and Dixie listened and poured coffee and said that sounded exactly right, and that was the end of that conversation, which was also exactly right. Tucker Roth made 2 more trips to eastern Kentucky in the following year, both times for families in neighboring counties who had heard through networks of people who knew people that there was a man who understood how property records worked and who would look at a situation honestly and tell you what he found. He charged nothing. He drove himself in his own truck. He brought his reading glasses and his notepad and the particular patience of a man who had spent years learning how to read the record that things left behind, and who understood that reading the record carefully was sometimes the most important thing a person could do. Zane Bishop called Rex once from the road late on a November night, the year after Harlan calling from somewhere in Indiana, where he had stopped for gas. He had been thinking, he said, about the forge and the Saints and what those words had meant to him over 23 years. He had been in the club since the 2nd year. He had heard the story of Wade Riggs so many times it had become part of the furniture of his mind, a story you stopped seeing because it was always there. And then Zane said, "I stood in Dixie Riggs' kitchen And I understood it was not a story. He paused. It was a fact. It was a thing that happened and kept happening because it was that kind of thing. Rex had said yes on the phone. Some things kept happening. Some acts were that kind of act, the kind that generated forward motion, that did not stop when the act itself was over, that traveled in people and decisions and fence posts, replaced on cold October mornings, that showed up in the handshake of an 82-year-old man and the first shoots of 40 apple trees on a creek bottom in April. Wade Riggs had stopped in a bar in Detroit on a November night and sat in an emergency room until morning. The momentum of that had not stopped yet. Rex did not think it was going to stop. He thought it would keep going the way the creek on the Riggs property kept going over the same stones, making the same sound it had always made long after anyone currently alive to hear. It had been replaced by people who would also hear it and not know they were hearing something that had been moving toward them across a very long time. That was what stopping meant. Not an action, not a single moment, a direction, a current set in motion and maintained by the people who understood what it was for and what it was worth, and who kept showing up season after season to make sure it kept moving. The fence held. The water moved. The door kept opening. And somewhere in Columbus, over coffee, a woman who had grown up without a father was deciding what to make of a man who had spent 23 years becoming someone worth meeting. She had not decided yet. He was not in a hurry. He had learned from a man who drove trucks and hammered iron and stopped for strangers that patience was not the absence of urgency, but the presence of something more important than urgency. The understanding that the right things moved at the speed they moved and that trying to push them faster was how you broke them. He waited. He would keep waiting. The ring on his hand was iron. Iron did not pretend.